Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Without a secure domain name system, the Internet doesn't really have any security at all. Well, now the National Institute of Standards and Technology has revised its Secure DNS deployment guide and is seeking public comment. For more on the importance of the DNS and what's in Special Publication 800-81, Revision 3, we turn to one of its principal authors, Cricket Lou. Mr. Lou, good to have you with us.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
And just review for the lay audience exactly what the DNS is and why it's so important to securely getting information from point A to point 89 million on the Internet.
So the domain name system is the standard naming service on the Internet. It's the infrastructure that takes all of those funny dotted names that you're familiar with, things like fcc.gov, for example, and translates them into other data like IP addresses and mail routing information and so on. If it's not around, then you can't visit websites and you can't send electronic mail and you can't do just about anything. Basically, all non-trivial transactions that occur over the Internet are mediated in some way by DNS.
And if someone were to spoof or somehow get into the DNS with nefarious intentions, then everything could go haywire.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's in fact happened in the past. As early as, I think it was 1997, we saw what was the first cache poisoning attack out on the Internet, where people who thought they were going to the Internix website, which was where you then registered subdomains of .comnet and .org, ended up at a completely different website.
All right, and now there are multiple names with multiple dot endings because those have multiplied. So the whole thing is a little bit more complicated than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely enormous now, and it's a massive credit to the original design of DNS and the designers of DNS that it's managed to scale as broadly as it has to serve an Internet today that is so many orders of magnitude larger than the ARPANET, in fact, on which DNS was designed.
And you were there for that ARPANET too, I understand.
Yeah, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say it, but yeah, I was a simple user of the ARPANET back when I was in college.
All right, so what has changed? What is the NIST motivation in revising their publication concerning secure DNS? Who should be concerned with this?
Well, I would say the motivation is chiefly that the document, which has been so useful over the years to so many people who have some responsibility for management of DNS, it hadn't been updated since, I believe, 2013. So it had been over a decade since it had been updated, and there were some pretty important developments in the world of DNS that weren't included in the document. We really felt that two enhancements to DNS, one called encrypted DNS and the other one called protective DNS, were important to include. And then there were a whole bunch of sort of miscellaneous updates that needed to happen. So NIST was eager to update the document and include these new technologies so that people could take advantage of them and understand the best ways to deploy them.
And who is responsible in a given organization, if anyone? Because most people, most groups, most companies, agencies simply consider themselves users of the DNS. And you can register this name, joeschmo.edu, and that's all you have really any control over it in the first place.
In most organizations, there's a team, maybe just a person within the networking portion of IT who's responsible for DNS. Back in the old days, back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when I actually had responsibility for managing DNS at HP, we had a lot of people. We had something over 100 people who are responsible for management of DNS in some way, shape, or form across the company. Nowadays, it tends to be fewer people than that, but a handful, let's say, in a large organization, maybe as many as a dozen or 20.
We're speaking with Cricket Lou. He is the chief DNS architect at Infoblox and an author of NIST Special Publication 800-81. That's Revision 3 just out. So those people that are in the IT, then federal agencies would have people responsible responsible, and what do they actually do to make sure that the DNS is secure?
Well, a lot of those people also have responsibility for the configuration and management of DNS servers. So this is software that supports the domain name system, software that basically responds to queries about domain names. So that, for example, if we go back to our, say, fcc.gov or infoblox.com example, a DNS server could receive a query that says, hey, what's the IPv4 address for www.fcc.gov? And the DNS server would then respond over a standard protocol, which is also somewhat confusingly called DNS. There's the management and configuration of those DNS servers that has to happen on an ongoing basis. You have to make sure that those DNS servers are up and running and also that they're secure, that they don't fall victim to various types of attacks. You have to keep that software patched. You have to have it running on a secure platform, hopefully a platform that's dedicated to that isn't performing a whole lot of other functions.
Well, now we have the cloud era, which has come on pretty strong since 2013, since Revision 2 came out. Mm-hmm. Does that complicate things? Because how many agencies, and so many of the small ones, do all of their IT in the cloud? You can't walk in and point to a machine and says, there's our DNS server. Yeah. The cloud definitely does introduce a brand new dimension that complicates management of DNS. A lot of the clouds have their own, we would say, cloud native DNS systems. So, for example, in Amazon's AWS, they have a DNS system that's called Route 53 that a lot of listeners are probably familiar with. In Google, it's called Google Cloud DNS, and I think that Azure's is just called Azure DNS. And all of these systems are managed through their own web-based user interfaces. They all have different APIs, and a lot of organizations now have DNS infrastructure that spans both their on-premises DNS infrastructure, which might be supported by, for example, Bind, which is one of the most popular open source implementations of DNS servers. It might be supported by Microsoft's DNS server, or if we're fortunate, it might be supported by Infoblox. But then they also have this component that's in the cloud running on different infrastructure. And it becomes a challenge to kind of knit all of this together to manage it because, again, different user interfaces, different APIs. Also, you have to make sure that from the cloud, you can resolve things on premises and vice versa. From on-premises, you have to be able to resolve things in the cloud. So you have to kind of knit those namespaces together with some of the tools that you have available to you. So it does become challenging. Right. So your organization's DNS server might be in the cloud. The cloud provider will worry about its own DNS servers. But if your DNS server is in that cloud, you're still responsible for your own security and deployment and configuration. Yeah, and I should specify that most large organizations have lots of DNS servers. We're not talking about one DNS server. We're a large U.S. government agency like Department of Homeland Security or Department of State or something like that will have possibly hundreds of DNS servers. So it's not just one that you're worried about the care and feeding of. It's dozens or even hundreds. That means, I'm guessing, you need some element of automation in this. No one can tend to those things by hand. Yeah, absolutely. That's the way that you get control over this infrastructure. Automation is so important because you don't want folks to have to go out individually to make configuration changes across a large number of DNS servers because there's the possibility that they're going to make some sort of mistake or introduce some inconsistency across them. It's just way too much work if you have to tend to this fleet of DNS servers manually. So some sort of automation is imperative. And because so many of these environments are this hybrid of on-premises and cloud, that automation can become pretty challenging because you don't have the same APIs across the environments. And getting back to the revision 3 of 800-81, what is it basically taking into account? All of that internet and cloud and zero trust history that's grown up in the past 10, 12 years? Yeah, we really did try to change the recommendations or adapt the recommendations to accommodate this new world of hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure. I mean, not just the encrypted DNS and protective DNS, which we thought was important, but also to acknowledge the fact that most
folks today have cloud infrastructure and they have DNS services in the cloud.
And comments are open now. When do people need to get their comments in?
Well, the draft went out for comment on April 10th, and it'll be up for a couple of months for comments. So you can download a copy of the new draft from NIST's website, and then there's an email address to which you can submit any comments that you might have. And I'd really encourage folks to download a copy, read it, and let us know what they think of the proposed changes.
Cricket Liu is Chief DNS Architect at Infoblox, and he's also an author of that NIST special publication 800-81. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.
And we'll post this interview along with a link to the document at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
Retired U.S. Army General Robert Brown's path to leadership was anything but conventional. Drawn to the military by its unwavering focus on mission, his decades of service in the Army emphasized mentorship, trust, and selflessness. Now president of the Association of the United States Army AUSA, General Brown joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to share insights on making tough decisions and leading with purpose.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today I'm joined by General Robert Brown, President and CEO of the Association of the United States Army, AUSA. General Brown, welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thanks for having me, Shane. Really appreciate it. Great to be here.
Talk about why you decided to begin your career in the military, and how did that eventually transition into many leadership roles in the Army?
I think people sometimes have this idea that folks in the military knew from the time they were born they wanted to be in the military, and nothing could be further from the truth. There are some people that are like that, but I think it's the exception. So for me, I was a pretty good basketball player in the state of Michigan my last 3 years in high school. And at the time, there was another pretty good basketball player named Irvin Magic Johnson. That was a senior in high school at the same time. And I remember my parents complaining how parents are with the kids, that he was getting all the publicity. And I said, he's pretty good, and turned out to be okay. Well, he was going to Michigan State on a basketball scholarship, and I got a basketball scholarship to University of Michigan. But then a guy named Coach K, Coach Mike Krzyzewski, was the coach at West Point, United States Military Academy, West Point at the time. So he was the head coach, and he came to my house and was very passionate about West Point. And so I said, okay, I'll visit. And I did my last official visit there and fell in love with the idea of selfless service and all that West Point stood for. The meaning I saw in serving a cause greater than self and defending your nation and the Constitution, just to me, it struck me as an amazing opportunity. So I went to play basketball,
Wow.
and did not intend on staying in, but then lo and behold, like 40 years later, I ended up retiring. So people come in for all different reasons, and for me it was initially basketball, but that idea of selfless service I hadn't been exposed to really struck home.
Well, finding a mission that resonates with you personally matters a lot. Your leadership style, has it changed over time? And then is there a moment that stands out to you as something that was particularly impactful to you and your leadership style?
I think when you're becoming a leader, all of us in whatever field, you're trying to figure out, you're reading and studying about leaders, and if you see a famous leader, say, oh, I'm a little bit like that famous leader or this famous leader, but eventually you come to the realization that you have to be yourself. Yes, you may have to, we all have strengths and weaknesses. You may have to work on your strengths a little more and fix your weaknesses, but nobody does you better than yourself. And so I think for me, that moment when I was a young leader, what we would call a company commander, so 3-4 years out of West Point, had about 180 soldiers I was responsible for, and to see that tough mission we had, forming a team and working very hard with literally lives at stake on what you do, and then to see it come together, it's just incredibly rewarding. And it wasn't so much the huge success, but when a soldier would say, hey, sir, that was really tough training, that was great, it's going to help us a lot. That feedback, it's like, boy, you just feel like you could keep going forever, developing those teams. And and being successful on a difficult mission.
So I think you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but in your mind, what makes leadership in the Army unique?
Well, lives are at stake. And just about anything you're doing, whether you're saving lives, which you do a lot. A lot of people think, you're in the Army, you just go and you're constantly fighting. No, there's a lot of things we do in the Army, and you spend way more time saving lives. Again, in a disaster, I think the ultimate is you may make a decision and someone's life depends on it. That's a lot of pressure. So we study leadership a lot. And the other thing I think is that it requires a level of trust beyond certainly any leadership in any organization. You can't be an effective leader without trust. But in the military, it's trust at a level that you're trusting folks with your life. And so that is a whole different level of establishing that trust. And it requires a greater level of character, requires a greater degree of care, and I would say love for the people you lead, the soldiers you lead. And leadership is still leadership. The stakes are different, but the same principles that apply in the Army and the military apply everywhere. It's just the stakes are a little greater there, but it's the exact same principles.
Have you ever taken a significant risk, and then what was the outcome?
The answer is yes. I don't believe you can succeed in any field without taking risks. It's going to lead to failure, taking risks, and it's a concern I have today. And to get back to the direct question, I can't tell you how many times I took risks, and I can think of about 12 times where the risks I took almost led to me being relieved and my career being over 40 years. Numerous times, from a young officer to a more senior officer. Now, they're not just wild risks, out of control. These are calculated risks where you think you're doing the right thing. In some cases, that was, there's a leadership thing that's very important, is to give the credit to the subordinates and take the blame when things go wrong. So the risk of a subordinate that's trying to do the right thing, it doesn't work out. I'm not talking about, they feel something immoral or illegal. No, they're trying to do the right thing, but it may not work out the way it was planned, and so they fail. And then you go to the leadership and say, hey, relieve me, don't relieve, Captain so-and-so. He was trying to do the right thing. So you, in essence, take the blame and we'll be relieved. I've done that numerous times, and and sometimes you have to, I think, to have that trust with those you lead, you have to be able to look in the mirror. And if you're doing the job for a promotion or the next job or to be a general, well, you more than likely won't be and shouldn't be. And I think that's very true in many fields as well. It's not that, you don't want to do your best, but you've got to think of the organization first and the team and first. And so you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and feel good about who you're looking at, and not that you're out for yourself. That builds that trust in the organization. They know you're going to empower them, trust them. In today's world, in any business, if you look at business, the ones that are exceeding are the ones that are empowering their people, taking risks, and they do extremely well. The ones who are holding them back and making all the decisions at the top, well, they're going to fail.
And people that work for you see that,
yes,
and they're reading that. And
yes,
if you don't do that, then you've lost the trust of every single person on your leadership team, and you might
yes,
as well call it a day. If they think you're in it for
yes,
yourself,
that's right.
Nobody respects that.
That's a tremendous point, Shane. And I would say this is an amazing thing. From the time we're born, we're evaluating those who are in charge of us, those who lead us, from your parents, your teachers, your coaches, your scout leaders. It doesn't matter, you name it. And if you ask somebody who's the best leader you ever worked for, rarely is it the smartest, rarely is it, whatever. It's the person they knew cared about them or the team and not themselves, right? They knew it. It was very clear. And as a leader, that is absolutely critical.
The last question is always kind of fun and interesting. Who is one person, somebody that you know personally, perhaps someone well-known, but someone who impacted your leadership style and why? Well,
the first answer to that would be that I was very fortunate to have many amazing leaders over the years, amazing leaders, and I could name like 10 of them. But the one I would point out for this, I would go back to my days as a basketball player. Coach K would be the guy, Mike Krzyzewski, the winningest coach of all time. He taught me how to build a team. And we stayed close after I graduated, and we talked leadership for hours over the years. And in fact, very proud over the years, whether it was 32 soldiers or 150,000, they called me coach. So it was kind of a compliment, I thought. And I got that really from him, and at the time I was playing for him. It was his first coaching job at West Point, and we knew he was really good. I'm not sure I would have predicted he'd be the winningest coach of all time. That's pretty amazing.
What an amazing person to know and
win 3 gold medals coaching the Olympic team and everything else. But definitely that I would credit him the most with building a team, and I was known as a team builder and took a lot of pride in that and enjoyed that in my time in the military.
Well, General Brown, thank you very much for joining
me.
My
honor.
Sharing your
thanks
stories.
For having me. And,
really appreciate it.
Yeah, and really appreciate it. And thanks for doing the podcast on leadership, because it's awful important. We need it everywhere. And I think it's key to our great country.
And thank you all for tuning in. This is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.